Use the quadratic formula to solve z squared plus 9 equals 10z. Again, before we apply the quadratic formula, we have to get all the terms on the same side. So to do that, we need to subtract 10z from both sides of the equation. Doing this gives us z squared minus 10z plus 9 equals 0. And now we can use the quadratic formula. In this case, a equals 1, b equals negative 10, can't forget that negative, and c equals 9. Let's substitute each of these values into the quadratic formula. We start off with the opposite of b, and since b is negative 10, that means the opposite of b is positive 10, plus or minus the square root of b squared. Negative 10 squared is 100, and then minus 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is 9, all over 2 times a, which is 2 times 1. Now let's examine the radicand. We've got 10 plus or minus the square root of 100, and that's going to stay a subtraction because there's not another negative to cancel out. And in this case, 4 times 1 times 9 is 36. So we've got 100 minus 36 under the radical. And in the denominator, 2 times 1 is 2. Now 100 minus 36 is 64. So that's going to become the square root of 64. And when we take the square root of 64, that's going to be 8. So we've got x equals 10 plus or minus 8 all over 2. This is the point where we look at the two solutions separately. X equals 10 plus 8 over 2, or x equals 10 minus 8 over 2, so that we can simplify each of the solutions on its own. For the first one, 10 plus 8 is 18, so we've got 18 over 2, and 18 divided by 2 is just 9. So the first solution is x equals 9. For the second one, 10 minus 8 ends up being 2, and we have 2 divided by 2, which gives us 1. So the other solution is x equals 1. And in this problem, our final answer is x equals 9, or x equals 1. I want to point out something that's going to be useful in just a little bit. If you look at our equation, z squared minus 10z plus 9 equals 0, this is actually an equation that we could solve by factoring. And factoring is going to be much simpler in this situation because we're not going to have a plus or minus symbol or any square roots or any fractions. So right now, we're going to be using the quadratic formula to solve all of the equations that we're looking at so that we can get practice with the quadratic formula. But in general, if you're just solving a quadratic equation and you're allowed to use any method you want, if the polynomial is factorable, generally factoring is going to be the easiest option by far. And we only want to actually use the quadratic formula when we have something that doesn't factor, where we need to use the quadratic formula.